Always appreciate the opportunity to welcome those of you who tune in on YouTube, either audio or video. Nice to have you with us. Today's a special day of a special weekend, and I'll actually bring up a couple of things that coincide with the arrival of our annual reunion weekend. So not only did we have hundreds of people in the blazing hot temperatures of yesterday coming back to Magic Mountain because of some connection or history to the place, but also many of you will have noticed or heard on the news or whatever that Thursday was the summer solstice. So 15 hours and 1 minute of daylight is the longest daylight interval. It happens to be astronomically for some reason this year earlier in the window of times when the solstice can arrive than other years. Irrelevant to my message, but I found it interesting. And then also Wednesday was Juneteenth. And as a person who would not necessarily always be identified visually as interested in Juneteenth, those of you who are more regular here at Caron may realize that I sometimes make reference to anything that connects to the notion of enslavement is powerful for me because I feel like addiction is an experience of enslavement. And this happened in my development out of atheism and into Christian faith. I was invited once of a certain year, it would have been 1994, by some friends I was making acquaintances up to go to an African American revival. And I think I was one of the only white guys in the room. And this 3-hour worship services every night were just like wild. And but the preachers were talking about, it was a gathering especially to speak to a small black church in a particular tradition. And they were talking about the history and the tradition having come out of this African American heritage. And I was thinking they were preaching right to me because I was not a target of the message, but the whole idea of captivity and bondage and all that stuff, it's really a strangely, sadly appropriate metaphor for those of us. There are a bunch of you who are wearing the wristband, and you can think of the wristband as a ball and chain, right? Like, it means that you found yourself trapped and you don't know how to get out. And that's why we're here, is to help facilitate your freedom. Okay. So, yeah, enslavement is a piece of this puzzle. It happens that the topic rotation for the chapel service would make today's subject loss. And there's a rotation of topics that move through the year in a way that's not coordinated with sun, moon, calendar, but just happens. And so, because yesterday we had the memorial service, that was an opportunity for me to speak about loss in terms of bereavement. But instead of skipping the topic of loss, I thought, oh, this is helpful, because now I can talk about non-bereavement related losses. And in particular, recovery, because I think that recovery is one of these things that we may not use the notion of loss, but I think it can be really helpful in terms of how hard it is to move out of one world and into another. And all change involves loss, right? This is one of the reasons why I think, I know all of you are perfectly fine with change, but a lot of people struggle with it, right? And it's the attachment, even to like yucky past, at least it's familiar, right? You know, so, and you watch people who return to what others of us might look at as really undesirable states, and we're often perplexed why, but I think it's the stickiness of attachment to the things that are familiar and the fear that attaches to the movement into the new. So that probably speaks pretty well to those of you who are maybe here in treatment for a second, third, or fourth time, right? And you have to reflect on what is it that's inhibiting me from sustaining the recovery that I see other people sustaining, and maybe it's been hard for me. And it might be that the interpretation of it in terms of a loss experience is illuminating. So, a word that I want to bring in this message today is the word watershed. And the word goes back to topography. Probably many of you know this, but just in case people don't. So a watershed is like the Rocky Mountains is a watershed, and water falls off towards the Colorado and towards the California from that, and none of the water that goes to Colorado gets to the California side, none of the water that goes to the California gets to the Colorado side because of the bridge. But, you know, as I was thinking about this particular thing, and change requires movement from one side of a thing to another, and we call this place Magic Mountain, right? And so this place is like a teeter-totter point. And I don't know that I've ever thought about the Magic Mountain label as a metaphor for this being a watershed experience, but so here we are. And that made me go down another bunny trail. You listen to me all the time, here he goes. But there were two people, a woman named Margaret Schob, if I say that correctly, and a guy named Hank Schutt, names. But in 1999, they published a paper in a journal called Death Studies. And Schob and Schutt's proposal was a new kind of way of thinking about grief loss experience. And there are tons of people who propose different ways of thinking about grief loss experience, but I find their model really interesting, and one of my colleagues, a spiritual counselor here, also is a person who's not a fan, but a student of this particular teaching. And the model is called the dual process model of grief. And what these two researchers suggest is that it may be helpful to think about loss experience as an oscillation, where the person who is struggling with loss moves from one kind of stress to another kind of stress. So first of all, they say loss sucks, right? Because it's stress, which loss does suck, by the way. I try to keep my mouth clean, but I think I'm all right with that word. Anyway, only here, by the way. But someday I'll grow to that. But yeah, get on the point, Jack. So the two poles of oscillation in this model are loss-oriented, that's your left, and restoration-oriented. So you can sort of imagine that, like how the loss-oriented is maybe bemoaning the things that are being taken or given up. And the restoration is oriented towards the new strivings and the new imaginings and the there's a letting go of the loss-oriented when we move into restoration, and there's a letting go of the restoration when we find ourselves back in the loss, right? And I think this is really helpful, because I think a lot of people have talked about loss processing as a kind of a linear journey. Even if they don't mean to, they're sort of like trot out these various phases, and it sort of makes those of us who are struggling with loss feel like we're not doing okay if we haven't progressed past the hard parts and gotten into the good stuff. But in fact, maybe it's a normal thing for us to move back and forth. And I like to complicate almost anything. And when I was thinking about this, I thought about what about the middle, right? Because there is a middle state to the dual process. And I want to call these two people up on the phone if they're still alive and kind of ask them, hey, have you studied the middle state thing? Because a separate area of research that really intrigues me is a thing that is called polyvagal theory, and the chief exponent of it is a guy named Stephen Porges, who's still alive, but kind of headed towards his own retirement. But anyway, Porges looks at human beings, what we used to call fight or flight, right? But like fear responses and the threat responses. And now Porges has called us to understand that there's two others besides fight or flight. There's freeze, and there's fawn, F-A-W-N, which is like, I'm going to make you think I'm okay and look nice, and like, when in fact I'm terrified that you're going to take me out, right? And so, and animals, mammals in our ecological and social environment exhibit all four of those states under threat. You can think of animals that do all those things. The possum freezes, and I'm trying to, I need a right example for fawn, but we know the fight or flight, which is even reptilian. Anyway, why I say this is all to think about whether or not you, as a person in this room today, where you are in relation to change. Are you loss-oriented? Are you restoration-oriented? Or are you in some like kind of panic response? And my guess is you're somewhere in that seesaw, ambivalence. and that you know better than I do which one of those is speaking to you. None of those is right or wrong per se, except you pay us to help get you this side, right? And if you're thinking about your child, like you want your child to get over the injuries and the difficulties that they're experiencing and move forward. And it's tragic when we see people stuck or even regressing, right? It's like, so there is a bias that I'm going to have, and then you probably have too, which is when difficult circumstances require change is either thrown at us or we elect it, that it's the, I'll use the word embrace, it's the embrace of change that is kind of like the obvious thing that those we care about. We want to have people figure out how to move towards, how to move towards the new instead of stuck or returned. And one of the things that I just said this to my sponsor about a struggle I'm having in relation to my recovery journey. I'm sober a long time, but I'm still an addict. And I said to him, I'm in the middle of this change thing, and I said to him, I realize that there's no real going back, because the thing I'm dealing with is a family issue related, and if I go back, my family's going to not respect me, and they're going to not want, they're going to be like, why? Why are you not moving into the new? Because they've lost the naivete. And so this is also true for a bunch of you who are here in your first treatment experience, and I'm sorry to ruin it for you, but we have probably messed up your drinking. I mean, I'm not sorry, I mean tongue in cheek, because this is part of what helps people begin to move towards the restoration side, is the loss of naivete, the beginning awareness of the need for change. There's an acronym, DARN, the desire, ability, reason, and need. Those are the things that help push people in one model towards the adoption of things that are more in congruence with the values that we hold dear. So, I also came across a teaching that came out of research about people's change recently, which was a bit of a wisdom trick here. If you want to help yourself change, and you're in an inner debate about it, it matters which way you order your conversation with yourself. So you want to romanticize, oh, this was great. Okay, but do that first. Talk about how hard it is, and you don't want to give this up, and all that sort of stuff, before you start talking yourself into the, however, my family relationship will be better, and I won't be blowing all that money, and I won't be throwing up in the bathroom in the morning, and, make it to the, family gathering and all that sort of stuff, because whichever one you do last, your brain will remember better than the one that you put first. So instead, think about it just for a minute. Suppose I say, well, it would be good for me to get sober, and it would be good for me to, do this better or do that better in my life. However, I can't do it. I don't think I can. I'm not, and I really, really like getting high. Which one is stickier, right? It's whichever one you finish with. That is what you're really talking yourself towards. I happen to think it's like a weirdly useful insight. And the stakes are too high here to not care or to be indifferent. Yesterday's memorial service calls that to mind. You shouted out, many of you were here and shouted out names. It's tragic. I would bet more than half of the room would shoot up a hand if I asked you within 1 or 2 degrees of separation, have you known somebody who died from overdose or suicide? It's so prevalent in our world and our society that this is not, do you want to learn to floss? This is, do you want to die or not, right? It's or do you want to lose a loved one to these forms of death? This is so urgent. But its pull to the old is so strong. It's bizarrely strong that we look at people what is wrong with you? Why are you continuing to drink from that well when there's this well of love and belonging and flourishing and good and useful purpose? And it's a bit of a mystery until you learn about the brain science and all that sort of stuff. And it's not anybody's fault that they are incapable of doing it until you get to the place of good health, right? So in a social context of good treatment and good all that sort of stuff, but you begin, this is the peculiarly interesting thing, is that people here begin to get choice given back to them. This is what it really breaks my heart when I see people kind of allow themselves to this. And when circumstances are so grave and the defenses are not there, that the quicksand finds them again, and the next thing you know, they're drowning. It happens all too often. There are a bunch of people in the room who have seen it. Many of you have seen it. Your loved ones tried and tried and tried and tried. If we had hands up about how many people are in their multiple treatment experiences, a lot of people here have been working on this for a while. It's a chronic illness. So like diabetes, you have to addiction is like this. But we frequently find ourselves at the tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell, the writer, right, wrote this important book in the year 2000 about tipping points. His observation was that individuals contribute to social change. But what I want to say is here we're talking about quite the opposite. We're talking about social influences influencing individual change. And we tread across tipping points all the time in our individual lives. Will I stop cussing, right? I can't believe I said that loud. Okay, will I find freedom from one or another of the forms of enshacklement, I made up a word there, that beset me and that threaten my family and my very existence? And there's probably a 12-step fellowship out there for me to attach to and to belong to and to find freedom. There are probably non-12-step fellowships. There's one Buddhist fellowship that does this for every single flavor of these kinds of things. Because underlying this, there's a unity. There's a fundamental dynamic at play here, which is a move to freedom, autonomy, dignity, independence, and self-worth, and a loss of autonomy and dignity and captivity to something that is dehumanizing and causes us to lose the ability to look ourselves in the eye. Here we are at the precipice. What do I need to do to woo you this direction? We can make that move together. This is the single most important thing in my view about treatment. It's not the medication, it's not the technique, it's the love. It's the call to belonging in a new form instead of belonging in the crack house and the lies of I'll just be a social heroin user. It's the hope and the belief and the faith that I can indeed get well. And the reality that there is help here to help you do that. All of those things are here right now. You've come to an amazing treatment place. And we live in a world that has this help on every corner in the 12-step flavor and on every internet site, even if you're living in remote Nebraska. You can access recovery. You can. And does it involve loss? It does. But why are we romanticizing that? Why are we I think I want to go back to, puking in the morning? What? Come with us. Come on the journey. Find the new day. Thank you, sir.